What happened at the Chalk River nuclear reactor? This was one of the first major nuclear accidents in history. On December 12, 1952, at the Chalk River Laboratories in Ontario, Canada, a research reactor suffered a serious accident. The reactor was being used for scientific testing, but a mix of equipment problems and human error quickly pushed things out of control. Several safety systems failed at the same time. Control rods didn't work properly. Cooling water stopped flowing as it should. Inside the reactor, heat began to rise fast. Soon, fuel rods overheated and ruptured. Hydrogen gas built up. Then an explosion damaged the reactor core, spilling radioactive water into the building. Large amounts of radioactive material leaked into the air and nearby soil. Even worse, contaminated water was dumped into trenches that led toward the Ottawa River. Cleanup was massive. Thousands of workers were brought in. Among them was a young U.S. Navy officer named Jimmy Carter. He and others entered the reactor building in short shifts, receiving radiation while helping with the cleanup. The site took years to fully recover. The reactor was eventually repaired, but the accident became a major warning sign. The Chalk River accident helped change how nuclear reactors were designed and operated. It showed the world that nuclear power demanded strict safety or the consequences could be severe. What happened at the SL-1 reactor on January 3, 1961? At the National Reactor Testing Station near Idaho Falls, Idaho, a deadly nuclear accident killed 3 men. It all started at p.m. 3 military operators were on duty at the SL-1, a U.S. Army experimental nuclear reactor. One man pulled out the reactor's central control rod, and the reactor instantly went from fully shut down to prompt critical. Control rods act like the gas pedal of a reactor. When inserted, they stop the nuclear chain reaction by absorbing neutrons, pull them out, and fission speeds up, producing massive energy. That night, removing the central rod made the water inside the reactor overheat and expand, releasing radioactive steam. Moments later, the reactor vessel violently exploded. One man was thrown and pinned to the ceiling. The other 2 were fatally injured. Most of the radiation stayed contained, which made cleanup easier, but it still took 14 months to fully decontaminate the site. All radioactive material was buried deep underground. The 3 men were laid to rest in lead-lined caskets inside concrete vaults. Why the control rod was removed remains a mystery. The most popular theory? One operator pulled it to avoid an awkward confrontation over a love triangle at work, choosing a nuclear disaster over a conversation. What happened during the Tokaimura nuclear accident on September 30, 1999? In Japan, 3 workers at the Japan Nuclear Fuel Conversion Company took a dangerous shortcut while preparing uranium fuel. Their mistake didn't just cost 2 of them their lives, it exposed hundreds to deadly radiation. To meet shipping deadlines, they skipped key safety steps. They accidentally mixed 7 times the allowed amount of uranyl nitrate and used uranium enriched to 18.8, far above the 3-5 needed. The result was an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. A bright blue flash filled the room, releasing lethal radiation. Alarms blared, and workers evacuated. But 56 employees, roughly 667 first responders, and nearby residents were exposed. Cleanup took months, and the plant was shut down permanently. Of the 3 men handling the uranium, 2 died from radiation shortly after. The third survived but faced criminal charges for negligence. The company eventually paid about $121 million to victims and businesses affected by the disaster. What was the worst nuclear accident in British history? For years, the answer was the Windscale Fire. On October 10, 1957, at the Windscale nuclear facility in the United Kingdom, a serious fire broke out inside a nuclear reactor. The reactor was built to produce plutonium for nuclear weapons, not electricity. The trouble started during a routine operation. The reactor overheated due to a failure in temperature control. Inside, uranium fuel cartridges cracked and caught fire. Operators tried to stop it. First, they turned the cooling fans to full power. That only fed the fire with more oxygen. Next, they tried using carbon dioxide. It didn't work. Then they tried water, but it barely helped. Only after the fans were completely shut off did the fire begin to cool. Even then, it took 3 full days to bring it under control. During that time, radioactive material escaped into the air. Large amounts of iodine-131 were released, along with cesium and xenon. The fallout spread across parts of the UK and even into Europe. Nearby towns were never warned. No evacuations were ordered. The British government kept the accident quiet, worried it would harm nuclear deals with the United States. Milk from nearby farms was later destroyed to limit radiation exposure. But the full truth about the disaster stayed hidden for decades. It's now believed that between 100 and 240 people later died from cancer linked to the radiation. The Windscale Fire became a turning point. It exposed the risks of early nuclear technology and the danger of secrecy when things go wrong. What was the worst nuclear disaster in U.S. history? Most people point to the 3 Mile Island accident. At 4:00 a.m. on March 28, 1979, near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a nuclear reactor began releasing radioactive gases and iodine into the environment. But what was happening inside the plant was far more serious. The reactor was overheating, leading to a partial meltdown, caused by a combination of equipment failures and operator error. Surprisingly, only a small amount of radiation actually escaped. That didn't stop the public from panicking, being jolted awake by police sirens and fire trucks, then told to shut your windows and stay indoors. Will do that. People rushed to their TVs, desperate for answers. Nuclear accidents were still new, so fear filled the gaps. Rumors spread that the reactor was burning, so hot it might melt straight through the earth, a claim lifted directly from the movie The China Syndrome. Naturally, the public looked to officials for reassurance. Later that day, the vice president of the company that owned the plant appeared on television. When asked what was being done to fix the situation, he replied, "I don't know why we need to tell you each and everything that we do." Not exactly calming. The 3 Mile Island accident helped ignite the anti-nuclear movement of the 1970s and 1980 seconds and led to sweeping reforms in how nuclear power plants were designed, operated, and regulated. Cleanup of the site was completed in 1993. And officially, no deaths have ever been linked to the disaster. At least none the industry is willing to claim responsibility for. What was once the deadliest nuclear disaster in history, at least for a few years, was the Kyshtym disaster, and it may be the most disturbing entry on this list. The problem started with how the nuclear plant was built. The Mayak facility in the Soviet Union was constructed as fast as possible, with little concern for long-term safety. But what truly made it horrifying was how radioactive waste was handled. Instead of being safely stored, nuclear waste was dumped directly into a nearby river. That river carried it past dozens of villages before it settled in Lake Karakay. When that lake became unusable, officials simply moved on to the next one, turning it into one of the most polluted places on Earth. Standing on its shore for just 30 minutes today would be fatal due to radiation exposure. With that context, here's the disaster itself. On September 29, 1957, a massive explosion equal to about 70 tons of TNT erupted at the Mayak plant. The blast came from a 27-foot deep underground container used to store nuclear waste. Its cooling system had failed days earlier and was never repaired. As the waste overheated, it ignited and exploded, launching radioactive material into the air and nearby city. Radioactive fallout drifted northeast, contaminating towns and villages along the way. And once again, no one was warned or evacuated. The government kept the disaster secret. Radiation sickness killed many locals within days. Only after bodies began piling up were entire communities evacuated without explanation. Residents were told they were being removed for no reason. The truth wouldn't come out until 2 years later. By then, an estimated 270,000 people had been exposed to radioactive contamination. What was one of the worst nuclear disasters in history, and at the worst possible moment? The Fukushima Daiichi disaster. On March 11, 2011, Japan was struck by a chain of catastrophes. First came a massive 9.0 earthquake that violently shook the country. But that was only the beginning. About 30 minutes later, a towering tsunami slammed into the coast, wiping out electrical power systems. As if that weren't enough, one of Japan's largest nuclear power plants soon began to fail. With the power gone, the cooling system shut down. 3 reactors at Fukushima Daiichi turned into ticking time bombs. The first reactor exploded on March 12. Another followed on March 14. A third on March 15. The disaster was classified as Level 7 on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the most severe rating due to the massive release of radioactive material. Surprisingly, only one death was directly linked to radiation exposure. But the larger tragedy was what came next. Around 165,000 people were forced to leave their homes, many never allowed to return, and others too afraid to go back. What was the worst nuclear disaster in history? We all saw this one coming: Chernobyl. And it's not even close. On April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat, Ukraine, an explosion occurred that would permanently alter the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. The disaster happened during a late-night safety test. operators removed most of the reactor's control rods, causing the water inside to overheat. At the same time, they lost control of the cooling system. Pressure inside the reactor rapidly built to extreme levels. At 1:00 a.m., the reactor exploded, releasing an enormous cloud of radioactive gas and debris into the atmosphere. The radiation released was equivalent to roughly 400 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Hundreds of first responders rushed to the site to fight the fire. Most arrived wearing basic protective gear, unaware they were walking into lethal radiation. In the days and weeks that followed, 28 of them died from acute radiation sickness. Some firefighters knew exactly how dangerous the situation was. They understood the radiation risk, but when they saw the fire spreading across the reactor roof, threatening nearby reactors, they went in anyway, knowing it would almost certainly cost them their lives. In the days that followed, more than 600,000 people, firefighters, plant workers, soldiers, and volunteers, were involved in containing the disaster and cleaning up the site. The most critical phase took 10 straight days. Today, Chernobyl remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth, and if you've never watched the series Chernobyl, you probably should. It captures the courage and sacrifice of people who stepped forward, fully aware they were giving up their lives to save others.